Hello, and welcome to Outnumbered the Podcast. I'm Audrey.
And I'm Bonnie. We are experienced moms to a combined total of 19 children.
In our weekly episodes, we explore relatable topics using our perspectives of humor and chaos.
Tune in for advice and encouragement to gain more joy in your parenting journey. Hey friends, today's episode is sponsored by Let's Make Art, our favorite new website for doing all the artistic things.
This is such an amazing website. Bonnie and I have just spent about half an hour going through everything they have, from their subscription boxes to their tutorials and their shop.
Yes, I cannot wait to take a look at some of these tutorials. They include things like art journaling, beautiful, watercolor, lettering, an entire section for kids projects, and then additional special projects like holiday themed art.
Okay, so I'm looking at this watercolor subscription box right now. It is so gorgeous. It comes with 4 watercolor projects, the tutorial videos to go along with them, watercolor paint, paper, outlines, graphite paper, basically everything you need except brushes. And the reason the brushes don't come in it is because everybody needs a brushes just for themselves.
Yes, totally. Especially if you have little kids around that are going to be stealing your supplies.
We're going to drop a link to Let's Make Art in our show notes, so be sure to check them out. And we have a discount code for 20% off, so you can get this amazing content for even less. Be sure to check out Let's Make Art today.
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. Today we are going to talk about something that Audrey and I have very little or very much experience with. Maybe both. And that is stillness, finding stillness in life. So I guess we should say it comes very unnaturally to us, but we have a lot of experience in making it happen because there's a lot of chaos at our house. But who couldn't use more calm and quiet in your life, right?
Yes, exactly. Hey, before we get started, we wanted to remind you guys that one way you can support the podcast is by leaving us a review on iTunes. Please. We know there's so many of you out there listening, and we appreciate every listener. And we would also love if you could help us grow the podcast, and you do that through leaving a review on the podcast app. I call it iTunes, but it's just the podcast app now. And it's really simple to do. If you want to know more about how to do it, step-by-step instructions, we have that in a highlight on our Instagram profile. But anyway, it helps other people find the podcast, because whenever reviews are left, that pops us up when people search for mom podcast or whatever they happen to be searching for. That applies to us. So please and thank you, support the podcast by leaving a review.
Yes, totally. And it gives us some social proof, right? Like when's the last time you bought something on Amazon that didn't have any reviews? Never. I'm not going to be the schmuck to take a chance on this product, right? No, you pick the one that has 3,000 4 or 5 star reviews, right? So that's what lets people know that there's some social proof out there. There's some people that love us. So thank you so much for listening and for supporting us. Okay, so like I mentioned, if there's one word that doesn't describe Audrey's and my lives right now, it's probably still or quiet. We've mentioned that a lot. One thing we tell our younger selves about having many children would be prepare for the noise. It's just very noisy, right? So because of that, I think that we are probably more adept at finding the stillness, and we have had to work hard for it. And we know how essential it is, because we will go absolutely bonkers if we don't create some quiet in our lives.
Yes, that is so true. One thing I have said so many times through the years is somebody who's as noise averse as I am should never have had 9 children.
Too little, too late.
Oh, it's very easy to go absolutely crazy when surrounded by many littles. Your body, your mind gets overwhelmed. Sensory overload sets in. We have an episode planned about sensory processing disorder, because that is something that I have had my entire life. And so somebody with my resume should never have had a noisy batch of
your
9
mental
kids.
resume.
No, I know. So as much as we need to find stillness for us, our kids need to learn this too. And that helps not only us get stillness, but there's advantages in them learning to be still as well. So we're going to talk through both of those parts of stillness today.
Yeah, and we chose to start with kids because if your kids can't learn to be still and quiet, then you're never going to get any quiet. So let's start with the cause of the problem here, and then we'll work on ourselves as well, right? It's so important for kids to learn to be still and learn to be quiet. And a few benefits that we researched and found were being alone with their thoughts. So this is something that adults and children suffer with alike in today's modern age. There's just stimulus coming at us from every direction 24/7, right? Do you remember back when you were a kid, Audrey, and after about 11 o'clock, that 11 o'clock episode of MASH, the TV just turned off? Like it was just static, just nothing. You know, there were no TV shows on at 2 o'clock in the morning. So even if you chose to stay up all night watching TV, you had to put in a VCR. You had to put in a VHS tape. Like there was just not all this stuff coming at us, right? So much more difficult and hard for us to find that quiet and stillness. Working through our emotions. So when we have some quiet time, we're able to process the emotions that we've felt and get to maybe a better place. You have to feel the emotions that come at you, right? You can't just ignore them and stuff them down in a box. So having some time to be alone with your emotions helps you feel them, helps you process through them, and come out on the other side. Make sense of all this sensory input all day long, right? You have to sit and think about it and put things in boxes, right? If you've ever talked to somebody who teaches children with disabilities, they'll talk a lot about categories and about how your brain has to learn how to categorize things, right? And children with certain developmental delays often have problems categorizing things, right? So they don't know that May is a month. They don't know that a microphone is a tool. And that is what your mind is doing when it's at rest. It's like putting things in boxes, closing them up. It's like, taking some effort off the RAM of your brain, right? If you have a billion tabs open, you can't function. And that's what happens with your brain at rest, is it's able to close down some tabs and wrap some things up. That's my very scientific explanation from the neuroscientist that I am. Another aspect of quiet and stillness, oftentimes it comes from separation, right? Like they'll go have some quiet time in their room. So that allows them to develop that skill of being separated from mom or dad, which some kids do not come by very naturally. And then they learn the ever crucial skill of learning how to meditate, how to pray, how to appeal to a higher power, and ponder the things that are most important to them.
Those are awesome benefits. We've noticed some of those too. And going back to what you said about, remember, when the television's turned off, not having grown up with a television in my home myself, I really was able to see the advantages of that level of quiet, or maybe that source of noise not being a part of my life, and like choose that for my kids as well, because I saw some benefits in myself and in them as well. So some things that we've seen is just an ability to sit still, to get into a quiet place, um, to be respectful in group settings and not be the kids throwing the temper tantrum, or making the noise as we come in, like teaching them stillness and an awareness of others, awareness of life outside of themselves, as outside of what's going on inside of themselves. When you're quiet, you are able to not only process, like you were talking about, all those things that you've seen and done inside of yourself, but you're able to have a better openness or awareness of what's going on outside of you, and be able to interact in a better, or maybe in a more meaningful way, with those things too. So those are a couple of the benefits that we have seen played out in our kids, and we're definitely in favor of more of that kind of stuff, less noise.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like these are habits and characteristics that are going to serve them for the rest of their life, right? Being able to be quiet. and I mean that like physically as well as just like,
Right.
out of their mouth.
Right.
Okay, so we know there's benefits, but how do we get this to happen? These crazy little wild minions that just want to jump all over the house and scream like little banshees. How do we get them to be quiet? Well, one of the first things that we've talked about many times is having regular quiet time at your house. This is something that I grew up with, and I didn't realize how rare it was until I became an adult, and I didn't know anybody who did quiet time, and that was for my mom's sanity, and bless her heart for making sure it happened, because it was really important for her and for us to have that time alone. One thing that I'm a big proponent of are positive timeouts. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but very often when you say timeout, it's like, well, you're in trouble, go to your room, kind of a thing. But in my mind, when a child is overwhelmed emotionally or just too much sensory input, if they are able to go to a quiet place, they can calm themselves down. And sometimes you may have to go with them, right? Or you give them a hug and say, "Oh, it seems like you're very upset. Let's go lay in my bed. Let's go do something together quietly," or just, make it not a punishment, because that's what they need to regulate their emotions. Soft music if necessary. So sometimes you can just change the entire um, feel of your home by turning on some calm classical music, or just books. Give them lots of books and say, "Oh, now it's quiet reading time. Everyone be quiet."
Those are great options to teach quietness. So some tools that we've used is just giving the child a self-awareness of, like for example, one thing I say to my kids when there's like four of them talking to me at one time is, guys, look at me. I have two ears, but I can only listen to one kid at a time. I'm really sorry. You guys are going to have to take turns. So just waking them up to the awareness that there was actually, four of them trying to talk to me at one time,
Mm-hmm.
and even though I have two ears, only they work together. They're a team. So teaching some self-awareness of, how loud they are in comparison to others. And if they're talking at the same time as somebody else. Something you mentioned earlier that we definitely use as a big life tool, but stillness tool, is teaching prayer to our kids. And we teach that by example, by praying out loud with them often. And then they see us praying quietly often, and they know that mommy and daddy are praying, or anyone is praying, that's a quiet time, and nobody is allowed to make noise. um, Time outside is something that is a huge benefit for them. And then not just send them outside and they continue making the racket they're making in the house, but you don't have to listen to it, but teaching them to listen. So I even start with this when they're babies. And one parenting tip somebody blessed me with very early on was, if your child is crying, whisper. And they
Mm-hmm.
they have to quiet down to be able to hear what you're saying. And so using a whisper is like a quieting thing to them. So it also teaches them to listen. Like if you're whispering, they have to stop making noise to be able to listen to you. And it's not like I walk around whispering all the time, so my kids have to shut up, but it's just one tool in my toolbox. Something I like is audiobooks. Like, they have to be quiet when they're listening to an audiobook. That's that is something that they want to hear, and so they're quiet when they do that. Another tool I have is not always providing them entertainment. uh, Making them come up with stuff themselves, like not always providing noise or entertainment, but allowing them to reach into the, kind of like you were talking about, inside their brain, and categorizing, coming up with things themselves. And if they're quiet for a little bit, they can always come up with something to do. And then one more example I had was we did an art program that used that was very specific in teaching that when your eyes use a different part of the brain than the ears. And so when you are creating art, you need to have it as quiet as possible. No talking, no listening to, anything, but to use the eye part of your brain to create art. The ear part of your brain needs to stop, or at least, quit working over time. So we do try that during some of our art lessons. Like, remember, we're going to try to use the eye part of our brain. And so we're going to turn off the mouth and the ear part of our brain so that we can tap into that little bit more shy, quiet eye part of your brain. And you can, and we can use that. And it's really a challenge because, like, pretty soon they start challenging each other, like, oh, you interrupted my eye part of my brain. If somebody else is interrupted doing that, I can't work as good when my ear part is working. Like, they'll start talking to each other like, shh, let's
I
be
messed up
quiet.
because you're talking.
I
Yeah.
know.
Well, that's so great. That makes me want to do art every day.
Art time.
I'm going
Hmm.
crazy. Get your paintbrushes out. I love that you mentioned nature. There's something about nature that just creates stillness in us, don't you think?
Yeah.
When I go out for a walk, I mean, sometimes I'll bring like an audiobook or something, but sometimes I just want that peace and stillness that comes in nature, especially if I'm actually out in nature, not just walking around my neighborhood, but in the forest or the woods or along a stream or a beach or something. There's so many noises in nature, right? But they're just really beautiful, peaceful noises. It's water, it's little squirrels, it's birds, it's I don't know. There's just something unique about that. In fact, when you mentioned babies crying, I was reminded of a couple of my older children had some fussy phases when they were little. And one thing that worked no matter how many times I tried it was taking them outside, especially when it was at night. In the middle of the night, they'd be fussing, and part of me just wanted to get them out so they wouldn't wake everybody else up. But taking them outside, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is different. This is peaceful. This is, and it was dark and it was warm and these new noises. There's just something about it that calmed them down. So if it can work for babies, it's got to work
Yes.
for us, right?
Yes. What's interesting is if you search on YouTube for calming nature sounds, there's like 3-hour long videos that
Cool.
are just the sound of wind or water or, something in nature, trees, rustling birds,
Maybe that would be something fun to put on during art time, right? So it's not
Yeah.
perfect stillness, but it's something very peaceful and calming, right?
Yeah, yeah. We like to even combine some of those, like do art in nature, like journaling,
Oh,
nature
yeah.
journaling, and take
Yeah.
take a sketchbook and go sit out in the woods and like combine some of those. It teaches an extra deep level of stillness.
Yeah, and there's something about quiet that makes you pay attention to things you may have never seen before, right? Sometimes life is so busy and fast that you just don't have never noticed that little bird that comes and pecks at your tree right there, right? Until you're quiet for a little bit. Okay, so now we wanted to bring up a particular challenge for many parents, and that is when your child is supposed to be still and quiet at a particular time and place. So I personally always think of church because we go every week, and every week I'm struggling with someone who has an outburst or is being, irreverent in some way or being a little bit wild, and we're trying to reteach them, okay, this is how we act. But it could also be school. I mean, if your kid goes to school and there's always outbursts, he's going to be a disruption to other children. It could be the doctor's office. You want to be able to take your 5-year-old to the doctor's office without them jumping off furniture and wailing and running around. So a few things, we're going to keep it brief, but tell you a few of our tools for this. And my number one is the preparation and training ahead of time, right? You cannot just take your child to an hour-long sermon and expect them to sit there quietly, right? When even the adults are nodding off sometimes. You have to prepare and teach them. Kate, remember, on Sunday at this time, we're going to be going to our church services, and this is what's expected, and this is what is acceptable, and this is what is not. And it takes time, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. And my best advice is to stay positive, to stay uplifting, but also to make sure that there are some consequences for if those expectations are not kept, so that they understand, hey, when you are unruly, you make it a negative experience for everyone here, and everyone who has come to hear and to worship deserves quiet and deserves to do it, how they want to do it. So, and then finally, make sure you have appropriate expectations for each development level, right? You cannot expect a 3-year-old to sit quietly for an hour. Some 3-year-olds will, very many will not. So just, feel your child out, understand what they are capable of, and then just push them just a little bit to go a little bit farther. Can you wait a little bit longer? Can you wait 5 more minutes and I'll take you to the bathroom? Can we just listen for a few more minutes? Push them a little bit farther.
Yes, yes. We have a definite kind of method we use to help our kids learn to be still and quiet in a church or our meeting settings. And one way we do this is we start setting up a practice session, practice situation at home. So before we, just go dump them into the situation, we start at home. So, like, we have a Bible study with our kids in the morning, most mornings, and we do require not quite as high of a level of quiet and stillness as we expect in our church situation, but a little bit of quiet and a little bit of respect. And so, preparing them for that idea ahead of time, that when people are praying, when people are reading their Bibles, when people are talking about it, that's time for you to be quiet. And so, again, we use, like I talked about earlier, we use some of the self-awareness. So when they start to act up a little bit, and when we're there, I say, look around you. Do you see everybody else being quiet and sitting still? Do you see anybody else, standing on their chair, if that happens to be the thing they're doing? And do you see anyone else, you know, dropping whatever all over the place? And another thing that we found pretty early on is a lot of people, please, if this is your method to keep your kids quiet, continue doing it. But for us, it was best not to take a bunch of different toys and distractions for the child. But we found that they learned to be quiet and sit still and be respectful sooner, the sooner they were aware of what was going on around them, instead of being distracted by books and toys and coloring pages and snacks and all that kind of thing. We just found what worked best for us was to make them aware of what everyone else was doing. So again, that awareness was a huge part of our training for them.
That almost reminds me of the one obnoxious guy on your airplane who's wearing headphones and is like laughing 10 times louder than he should, right? Because he's so hyper focused on this hilarious scene in his movie,
Yeah.
he's not aware of just how loud he is and how he's affecting everyone around
Yeah.
him. I've totally seen that in kids, that if they are given a coloring book or something, they're just scribbling away, singing a song. And, as soon as you take it away, they stop and go, oh, no one else is singing. Maybe just a little bit more aware, but sometimes it's the only thing that'll work. So obviously
Right.
no criticism there, but I've totally seen that before for sure.
Right, right. Yeah, and then we also definitely use, talk to them ahead of time. Okay, we're going to go to this place. We're going to be there an hour. We're going to be quiet and sit still. And then when we leave, if you do a good job, I'm going to reward you. And if you don't do it the way that I'm expecting, then we're going to have consequences. No rewards, and maybe, something special that you were expecting isn't going to happen. And be their support person. Hey, if you need something while we're there, like especially, a young child potty training, if you need to go to the
Hmm.
bathroom, just whisper it in my ear. I'm definitely going to help you do that,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. And then one more thing I really like to do is reward them verbally in the situation when they're behaving the way that I want them to be behaving. So if they're doing a really good job and they happen to be, listening or not fidgeting or being quiet, then I'll lean over and I'll say, thank you for being quiet and sitting still. That's really helping me be able to listen. Like just a little verbal pat on the back right there in the situation to help them.
Yeah, I love that for sure. Okay, and then finally, I wanted to say to not expect perfection, right? I think as parents, we can kind of generally all agree that we don't expect perfection ever. But sometimes we think, oh, well, we told them what to expect and they were still total monsters. For example, we didn't do in person church services for about a year during COVID. And when we went back, I was like, oh boy, here we go, right? And surprisingly, they did pretty well. And then what was interesting was a couple weeks in, they were like, oh, we're back for good. And this is hard. And then they started getting more rowdy. And I remember thinking, no, no, you were doing so well. So, just be
Oh,
prepared for those things to happen. Something is out of the ordinary or the schedule is a little bit different. And then all of a sudden they're crazy again. So just keep working with them. Um, like I said, my kids still struggle, and we've been doing this since the dawn of time, since before we had children. We've been going to church every week, except for COVID. And this is just something they're going to work on their entire lives. And you know what? My 17-year-old is great at it. But at 3, he was awful, and he learned little by little. He learned, and occasionally, still he'll sit by his brother and whisper a little bit, and I'll give him an eye. I'll do the side eye, and they'll quiet down. And we're the same way. We're the same way. We get distracted and want to talk to somebody. But consistency is key. If you do not give them regular opportunities to practice this, be aware that it will be more difficult. So it might be nice to just have a practice session. Let's say you don't go to church every week, or you don't have an opportunity for kids to sit and be quiet regularly. I would recommend doing a practice session. So when you do have that, so all of a sudden you plan a trip and your kid has to sit on an airplane for 3 hours
oh,
and he's going
yeah.
crazy, like that's something you're going to want to work up towards, right? So this can always come in handy, using this practice to sit and be still. Remember that each age and phase of life will bring different difficulties, right? Like you mentioned, potty training. The 3-year-old is going to struggle to sit still for an hour. He's going to be up 4 times trying to go potty. The 7-year-old might just always be distracted by her little friends down the pew or something. Be patient with it. Keep working with them. They will eventually learn.
Yes. Yes. I remember when we first went back after COVID, after at home meetings, and we went back to in person meetings. I was kind of feeling like my expectations were like I realized my expectations were too high for my youngest. And then I was like,
Mm.
oh, this little guy has never actually sat in person meetings before. So let's start at the beginning. He's not being naughty, he just has no clue. This
Yeah.
is a new thing. All right, now let's switch and talk about how we can incorporate more stillness into our lives. Do we even have to tell you the benefits? But this helps us remember who we are independent from our kids. Just, mom, 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 mom. So who we are and the value in that. And it gives us time to develop our own talents and abilities. It's all the same benefits that it is for the kids. The ability to sit still, the ability to be respectful, the ability to be aware of life around yourself can all be enhanced by quiet time as an adult as well.
Yeah, and I would argue that as adults, it's even more challenging, not because we're physiologically incapable of doing it, but because we are trained to be busy, right? We are told that busyness is like a badge of honor, that to sit around and do nothing is a scathing indictment. She just sits around and does nothing. Like, yeah, actually, it's okay. We're supposed to sit around and do nothing sometimes. That's how we come back to ourselves. That's how we process our emotions. That's how we learn to be still. But it is not really seen, looked upon highly for the most part. We want to be busy all the time. But learning how to be still can help us learn to contribute to society. It can help us get in touch with our own purpose, our big mission in life. We can feel more connected to our children when we return from having some stillness. Like I'm talking about when we have to separate our self from our kids to find stillness, because generally that's what I have to do, even if it just means the bathroom. But when I come
Mm.
back, all of a sudden I'm fun mom again. I'm excited. I'm happy to be there. Let's read some books. Let's go play outside, whatever, because I have been able to take care of my own mental and emotional needs. And then I'm teaching them stillness by example. I'm teaching them that when I get overwhelmed, so my husband's been out of town this week, and so I've had lots of opportunities to practice coming back from the edge, right? And a lot of the time I do that by separating myself. I say, "Oh, everybody's going a little bit crazy. I'll be right back." And so I just leave. The trick is to do that before I start yelling. But when I do that, then I come back and go, "Oh, thanks for letting me have a break, guys. My emotions were getting a little out of control. I needed to go calm myself down, and I'm back." And then they learn they can do the exact same thing, right?
Yeah.
This is how we also strengthen our knowledge and our relationship with God. How do you learn about this higher being if you're never still and quiet, if you're never listening, right? We process our emotions, like you mentioned, and just are better able to deal with all the strains of life that are coming at us all the time.
Yes, yes, those those are such good points and such good benefits. All right, so how do we do this as moms? We're busy. We're always having somebody touching us. How do we get quiet? How do we find quiet time? You just have to use everyday opportunities. You have to make it important, prioritize it, work it in. So I know that I've shared in past podcasts, and there's, I think, definitely benefit sharing it here. Is that I start every day in prayer and meditation, and I have to for my own sanity. And my kids are trained that if mommy is praying, if mommy's reading her Bible, I'm unavailable. It's like as if I'm not even in the room. And if
Mm-hmm.
they, if they interrupt, if they touch, I just don't respond. It's my prayer time. It's my quiet time. And they'll go wander off and find something else to do. And but
Go
that
make a
time
mess
has to be.
somewhere. Yeah.
I know that that time has to be sacred to me, because it's like the most important part of my day and determines how my day goes. Really, so it's like setting up myself for failure or success by starting my day like that. Um, you can shower. You can take a nice long shower. Maybe when dad's at home in the evening, just go for an evening walk by yourself. One thing that I definitely have found a lot of benefit in is yoga, and I use the Yoga with Adriene free videos on YouTube, and just practicing an inner stillness. And then something else that I have learned through yoga, and also there's some other people that teach it. Wim Hof is a specific practice practitioner of this, is a breathing practice. So I started this. My husband was kind of studying it and into it, and he's like, "You really need to look into this." And maybe just him suggesting it made me aware of how often I'm breathing really, really shallowly. And like just need to stop and take a deep breath. And then I started like learning some more of these tools like box breathing, and just breathing, ocean breathing, and just different things that just using your breath to bring calmness and stillness is like, it's one thing you're always in control of, your own breath. Nobody really ever controls that for you. That's you. And so that's one way that no matter what else is going on, how loud the decibels are getting, you can control your breathing. and
Yeah.
and you should.
Yeah. And what's one of the first things we tell to our kids that get completely out of control, right? They're either wild and screaming, or they're fighting, or whatever, crying. We tell them, take a breath, take a breath. The first thing you do is to breathe in, breathe out. And all of a sudden it centers you a little bit, and it makes you stop and look around. You've been crying, you've been railing and ranting. This happens to me as well. I lose control and I just think, nope, just breathe. Breathe through this moment and then you can step back a little bit. Oh, look. And maybe it's because, those shallow breaths mean that you're depriving your brain of some oxygen. You can't really think straight. Get some more oxygen going, right? Okay, so a few other ideas for finding your own time for stillness. If you can't get separated from your kids, take them to a park. Let them play in nature. Let them enjoy the playground or running around in the grass while you do your meditating in nature. You can just go to the other side of the park and just take some deep breaths, read a book, whatever it takes to find some stillness. Get up early, like Audrey mentioned, before your kids, if possible. Stay up later, which I think is less ideal because your brain starts to kind of deteriorate late at night. But sometimes it's the only thing you can do when you have a lot of little ones and they beat the rooster up. It might just be, 8 p.m. is your time. And that's great too. But you can do quiet time with your children. We mentioned instilling a habit of regular quiet time during the day. Like this was my saving grace when my oldest dropped his nap. When he stopped taking a nap during the day, I almost had a panic attack. I thought, what am I going to do now? He's going to be awake in here all the time. And then we decided to homeschool, and I'm like, I'll never be alone again. So quiet time, we started using not as a punishment, but just as a natural course of life. Now it's time for everyone to be quiet. Mom needs it. You need it. We're all going to go to separate places in the house and take a breather. Like I mentioned before, this timeout can be used as a very awesome tool for kids to calm themselves, as long as it's not used as a punishment. And if you've chosen this as a consequence, that's okay too. But I would challenge you to look at it in a different way. If you can use it as a positive motivator to get them to a better place emotionally, then you can probably use it more without them thinking that they're getting in trouble all the time, right? Because there's nothing wrong with separating yourself and calming yourself down. It's actually a great tool. When they do this, they're able to sit with their emotions, gain greater physical control of themselves, because when little kids lose it, they're physically all over the place. But if it's forced, there's going to be some pushback there. So that's why I just suggest making it a positive experience.
So thinking about it, not making timeout a negative thing for them, and thinking about how, us as adults, we're trying to apply this to us as moms. So how do we make us having timeout a positive thing for the kids? Like us putting ourselves in a quiet time. Like it's not a punishment for them when we go have our quiet time. It's how do we make it a benefit for everybody? So maybe, hey, you guys can listen to this audiobook while I go do my yoga and save something special for during that time. I mentioned how one tool I use when I'm sewing to get extra time sewing is I have toys that my kids are only allowed to pull out and play with when I'm sewing. And so they really look forward to me going to sew, because then they get to play with these couple little toys that I have that they only get when I'm sewing. And so like it's a reward for them as well. If mommy's getting quiet time, if mommy's getting filled up, then they're getting, so just thinking about it not being a punishment for them when we go have our quiet time too.
Yes, totally. And then they look forward to it. Yeah, mom, go do your thing.
Yeah. Mom, don't you need to go sew or do yoga
Yeah.
right now?
Yeah, totally. So finally, we just want to share with you guys that if there's something lacking in your life, if you're feeling kind of ungrounded, a little bit scatterbrained, this could be the missing key, honestly. A little bit more quiet and stillness in your life and in the lives of your children. And don't get overwhelmed by all the suggestions we've given you, but maybe just pick one thing you want to work on with your kids. Maybe it's that you've been coming home from church on Sunday going crazy because they're such little psychos. So you're going to work on practicing every day, a little bit of quiet time. Or maybe you're the one that needs some separation from your kids, so you're going to make a plan with your husband or decide to create a quiet time for them in the afternoon, and that's when you go do something just for you. But yeah, just pick one thing and work on that, see how it goes.
Yes, and I had a thought here. So think about, so if you're in the camp where I've often been, where I say I just don't have time to add in quiet time, like where am I going to fit this in? How am I going to do this? Think about how much time modern day conveniences have given us, so we don't have to, wash our clothes at the river and wring them out and hang them up on a line, and we don't have to, wash our dishes by hand and fill in the blank. We have a lot more time than our ancestors did. The women in our families did, raising their families many, many years ago. How do we fill that extra time? How have we chosen to fill that extra time? And could we um could we find, yes, we could. We can. I challenge us all to find some of that extra time that our conveniences have given us. So throw a load of laundry in and go spend a little time being quiet while it is doing the work for you. Just to use an example, or same with the dishwasher. It's not always move on to the thing that's next and the thing that is demanding our attention the loudest, but maybe it's the things that are quiet that aren't demanding our attention enough, that we really really need to go embrace those things in that time.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. I bring that up a lot when talking to friends, and I think sometimes people think I'm crazy when I say that we have so much more time now than our ancestors do, but it really is true. We've just chosen to fill it with a lot of things. We've chosen to fill it with television and social media and internet scrolling and good things too, time with friends or maybe you work, whatever. But is it always very purposefully done, right? And are you including the things that are essential for your mental, spiritual, emotional health? Or is it just things that you feel like you should be doing or just want to do? Sometimes being still is not the funnest thing to choose, right? Sometimes you want to just veg out in front of the television, but your sanity needs that stillness and that reconnection with God, with nature, whatever it is that you're feeling you need. So yeah, and another thought is like if you ever have an emergency, right? Like a kid breaks an arm and you have to go spend the afternoon at the hospital. Somehow you manage to do that. Everything just gets dropped by the wayside, right? Because an emergency came up. Well, like let's take care of ourselves before our mental health becomes an emergency, right? let's go
Oh,
let's go require that stillness of ourselves so that we're better able to handle the storms of life.